Hi there, thanks for joining me for my first YouTube tutorial where I will be walking you through the steps to make a miter stripe quilt block. By using a few unconventional techniques like ripping your fabric and not caring much about measurements, you'll have perfect stripes that match up every time. Second-hand striped shirts are the perfect material for this project because you want strips to be about 18 inches long and for the stripes to be going the long way. When you purchase fabric off of a bolt, the stripes generally run around the bolt. So even though we only need a 3.5 inch section, or the equivalent of a 1/8 of a yard, the stripes will be going in the wrong direction. So if you will be purchasing your striped fabric for this project, make sure you're getting at least half-yard cuts. One kind of unique way that I make sure the stripes remain true is that instead of cutting long strips, I'm just going to use my rotary cutter to cut small notches about every 3.5 inches, and then I'll rip my strips the rest of the way. All of that ripping will make your stripes go a little bit wonky, so go ahead and take the time to press your strips nice and smooth. I'll be cutting my segments using a specialty ruler called the companion angle. You can get by with using just the 45-degree mark on your square rulers, but if you're going to be making a quilt full of these miter square blocks, it's definitely worth the investment. Start by placing the rule at about the top of your strip. Because you ripped your strips instead of measured them carefully, it might not match up with a specific mark on the ruler, and that's okay. The most important thing is that your stripes are lining up every time. For every strip you cut, choose a specific line on your ruler that will always match up with a specific stripe on the strip. Each strip is going to yield 2 sets of triangles. There will be the triangles that are cut from the bottom of the strip and then the triangles that are cut from the top of the strip. You might end up with 2 of each, maybe 3 of each. It's not especially important as long as you're keeping the sets together in your piles. After you cut the first triangle from the strip, you'll continue on down the strip, leaving a 1/4 inch to make the top of the upside down triangle, lining up the arrow with the top, and then choosing somewhere on your ruler to line up with some kind of a stripe. You can see that in this example, I'm choosing that solid 3 to line up with a blue line. When you get to the end of each strip, you'll be left with a little bit of fabric that's not big enough to cut another triangle from, but make sure that you're setting these aside. You'll be using them as a leader and ender project to make a scrappy square for your quilt. Over at the sewing machine, it's time to sew my strips together. I'm not actually going to line them up perfectly. I'm going to back the top triangle off from the bottom triangle just a little bit, just so that I can see that the stripes will match up perfectly. Stitch these triangles together using about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, even though the top is backed off a little bit from the bottom. When I'm working with stripes this tiny, I actually prefer to not use pins. I find that pins pucker the fabric. Really, the best way to get your stripes to line up is with the uneven seam allowance technique. Not every triangle has a match, so sew together the ones that don't, and you don't have to worry about matching stripes on these ones, of course. Now it's back to the ironing board. It's really fun to see how your stripes matched up so well and to watch the blocks start to come together. To continue to have nice, neat corners and points as we continue to assemble these blocks, it's important to press each triangle in the same direction. The leftover fabric from the end of each strip can be sewn together by matching the points and then press that open. Back at the sewing machine, it's time to sew the triangles together. Because you pressed all of the seams in the same direction, when faced towards one another, the seams are going to butt together. As you can see, when you press your seams, it makes a little bit of a ridge. So use 2 of your fingers to pinch those tightly together while you guide the rest of the fabric through the machine. You'll notice too that the points aren't going to match up. The most important part of this square is that those seams butt together and stay nice and neat. So use one hand to hold those together and keep them parallel to the machine so that you can accommodate the bias as much as possible. Feed it through the machine, and once again, it's okay that the points don't match up. The center is the most important part here. Once you have stitched to the center seam, you can rearrange your fingers so that you can hold together the points of the fabric and then sew the square the rest of the way. Now comes my very favorite part where I get to press the squares open and see how unique each one turns out. If you've felt uncomfortable making a quilt square with such a disregard for measurement, you'll feel a lot more comfortable once we get these trimmed to size. For these to become 6-inch finished squares, I'm going to put the diagonal center line on the 6-inch mark of my ruler, and then put the little arrow on the center seam. Trim, and then repeat the process on the other side of the square. This little triangle comes in exactly at the 6-inch mark. And that's okay, I just won't trim it at all. Remember that throwaway fabric from the end of each strip? Let's get those trimmed up with a regular square ruler. Just line up that diagonal line with the 45-degree line on your square ruler and trim at the greatest possible measurement. Each square will end up being a different size depending on the size of the strip, but you'll trim them down later. Eventually you'll accumulate enough small squares to create a scrappy block like the one shown here. I don't have an exact pattern in mind for how I'll be using all of these little squares. I'll just continue to make them as the fabric becomes available. Although it's a lot different from other quilt squares you've made in the past, ripping your strips, not really caring about measurements, and avoiding pins is what will make your miter stripe squares line up perfectly every time. Be sure to ask any questions in the comment section below. If you found this tutorial helpful, which I hope you did, please like, share, or subscribe.